Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes, just waiting for some critical mass. Okay, well, I have noon on my time, so I just want to start off and say thank you to everyone who is joining us today. We have a really exciting program to share. For those who don't know me, my name is Sasha Mariquin, and I'm MPC's executive assistant and your moderator for the next hour. We have a really exciting program to share that will consist of 3 presentations by my wonderful MPC colleagues and a panel discussion later on in the program. But it wouldn't be a virtual meeting without some housekeeping Zoom rules that we all know so well at this point. So I just wanted to draw your attention for this program today. We have enabled the chat and Q&A functions. So at any point in the next hour, if you need to get my attention, please use those functions. Thank you for everyone who has submitted their questions during our registration period. But there will be a time after our panel discussion that we will open it up for live Q&A. I also want to draw your attention to closed captioning options. Please utilize those and turn them on and off at your preferences. And just a reminder that this event today is being recorded and will be sent around in addition to some additional references after this event concludes in a follow-up email. So I'm really excited to get us started and talk about the challenges and milestones MPC has achieved in 2021 and how that pans out to the structural change that we have seen in our region this year. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our keynote speaker for today, Melissa Washington, MPC's board chair, who will be kicking us off and discuss what we mean by legacy as we move forward in today's event. So Melissa, I will kick it off to you.
Thank you, Sasha, and I so appreciate and I'm so honored to be here today. So first, I would like to welcome everyone and just thank you for joining us today for the 23rd and final Metropolitan Planning Council event of the year. We're thrilled you're joining us today to celebrate some of the major accomplishments MPC helped move forward this year. Past, present, and future, the MPC legacy. That's the title for today's event. But don't fret, I do not intend to walk through the chronological timeline of all the great accomplishments of MPC, because that would take the entire hour and beyond. However, I do want to take you back to the origins of MPC. It all started in 1934, when a group of dedicated changemakers banded together to fight housing inequities. They had no idea that they were charting the future path for over 85 years of individuals committed to supporting meaningful change in this region and really having a positive impact on what we experience today. Now, if I bring it to the present, MPC continues to work on addressing the systematic inequities that plague the citizens of our region, from quantifying the cost of segregation, advocating for the replacement and elimination of lead services lines, to supporting the first comprehensive citywide plan since 1963. These are just a few of the many ways MPC advances meaningful change to improve lives. Quite frankly, it's because of this mission and their longstanding commitment and the legacy that has been part of the fabric of MPC is the main reason why I joined this board. Like many of my fellow board members, we really felt a call to support the mission and the work of this amazing organization. When you think about the challenges in this region, you have to think about the history of systematic and unjust developmental processes to sowing seeds of equity and sustainability. MPC staff are acutely aware of the importance of their work in the pursuit of a prosperous region. The shared passion for transforming the region's history of inequitable power structures and disinvestment is what drives the organization's meaningful and longstanding change. This is the legacy of MPC today. And I'm thrilled we have the opportunity to hear from the staff who have been ultra committed and very focused on putting their time, energy, and effort in supporting a region where we can all thrive. So what about the future of MPC? Well, earlier this year, MPC announced plans for a new leadership. Mary Sue Barrett, who had served this organization for 25 years, decided that she wanted to step into something new. MPC, starting next year, will enter the new year with a new leader. We are excited about the appointment of Darlene Hightower as president and CEO of MPC. We are confident that the future of MPC is bright and long-lasting. There is a long runway of progress ahead for MPC and much more progress to add to its legacy. At least an additional 85 years. MPC will continue to have impact led by change makers whose change will meet the needs of the citizens of our region, ensuring that they're upholding the mission that started by that small group back in 1934. And with that, I want to turn it back to Sasha to kick off today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And as you were mentioning, I would love to introduce the next three presenters that you will be hearing from. First, we will be hearing from my colleague, Debbie Liu, on citywide planning, followed by Justin Williams on lead service line replacement, and last but certainly not least, Audrey Wennick on performance-based planning and municipal collaboration. But first, as Melissa mentioned, there is no way to sum up MPC's history in an entire hour, but we could reflect on a few pivotal moments in our time. So a brief glimpse into our past. As Melissa was mentioning, MPC has been around since 1934, but some may not know that it emerged during the Chicago World Fair. Like many of us here today, it was a group of like-minded change makers in our region who recognized a need for access to affordable housing, a reimagining of what our public spaces could look like that emerged into the museum campus, and a remodernization of our transit systems. It's the pillars that have guided our work since then. We have recognized at MPC the importance of engaging with our legislators and officials, continue dialogue with community members, and emphasize the importance of people-centered planning. So flash forward to 2021, this has led us to take the call to action and become a member with the city on its first citywide plan since 1960. I would like to introduce our first panelist and my colleague, Debbie Liu, who is a person who has worn a lot of hats this year. Not only is she MPC's Community Engagement Associate, she has been a member of Chicago's Redistricting Advisory Council, and to top it off, a new mom to baby Theo. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Debbie.
Oh, can you hear me now? Great. All right. I'm Debbie Liu. I am the Community Engagement Associate here at MPC. I use my she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm going to talk a little bit about We Will Chicago when the presentation comes up. I had the privilege of working on this for later half of the year. And next slide. And it's a very exciting initiative that will go into 2022 and has long-lasting effects into the future. Next slide. So We Will Chicago is actually the first citywide plan since the 1960s. Specifically in 1966 was the last time we actually worked on a comprehensive citywide plan. The Metropolitan Planning Council has been a partner with Department of Planning and Development, the Mayor's Office of Engagement, and other folks to really look at ways that we can really engage the city as a whole. So we've been developing a tool called Meeting in a Box, which I will share a little bit more about towards the end. But I also wanted to just kind of go over We Will Chicago and some of the pillars and themes that go along with it. Next slide. So the framework for We Will Chicago has two principles, and that's considered the North Star of the plan, and it's equity and resilience. So I'll talk a little bit more in depth later, but then I just wanted to share all these other themes and pillars. So there are 5 themes, and the themes are kind of more like roadmaps for the process to complete a citywide plan. And those briefly are historical reckoning, systemic evaluation, accessible and meaningful engagement, accountability, and cross-collaboration. I'll explain more in a little bit. And then the 7 pillars. So these are the key qualities of life drivers to be addressed in the plan. And they include arts and culture, economic development, environment, housing, lifelong learning, public health, and transportation. Next slide. So as I was sharing earlier, the 2 principles are equity and resilience. So we couldn't really do much if we don't actually have a good definition of what we mean by when we talk about equity. So to us and the city, equity is both an outcome and a process. This results in a fair and just access to opportunity and the resources that really provide everyone the ability to thrive. Right? Resiliency. Its ability for individuals, institutions, businesses, and systems to really use community to survive, adapt, grow, despite chronic or acute stresses and shocks. So a good stressor would be something like COVID-19. And if we are resilient as a city, we will be able to recover from that and perform well beyond the time that COVID would be happening. So really, we're really hoping that these recovery can look at past our challenges. So I was sharing about the 5 themes earlier, and this was crafted with Metropolitan Planning Council with our planning coalition. So we really just wanted to understand from communities what was needed to shape a plan. So the first one is historical reckoning and trust building. This is something that we really want to right the wrongs of our history and really ensure that the people who are providing input into this plan are potentially the folks who are most disenfranchised historically, and then really understanding what that means and how that looks like. Systemic evaluation of equity impacts, we really want to use this as strong metrics into what equity and resilience can look like for the city. And then the third one is accessible and meaningful community engagement, which is who are we centering in this plan? How do we ensure that the people who deserve to be to have input in this plan actually are at the table? And then accountability through shared metrics and transparency, something that we want to make sure is at the core of how we continue to look at this plan and other plans that the city will create. Sustained interagency and cross-collaboration. So this is something that we want to make sure that the city isn't necessarily working in silos, and maybe the Department of Public Health is working with the Department of Transportation on a shared understanding and goal that can really drive We Will across the city. Next slide. So the 7 pillars. So these I guess, topic areas that the We Will Chicago citywide plan would be able to touch on. So this is arts and culture, economic development, environment, climate and energy, housing and neighborhoods, lifelong learning or education, public health and safety, transportation and infrastructure. And these are very typical tools, practices that cities, big and small, use to lump different goals and outcomes together. So the public engagement channels, I'm going to share some of the overarching things, and then I'll share a little bit more about Meeting in a Box in a second. So there are these research teams that the city has kind of created to give more of a technical knowledge and expertise to the different 7 issue pillars, and then the community engagement events that are done by the arts and culture and research team together, and then the artists and organizer teams that work in tandem for the events for engagement. And then there's also these surveys, which is on the website, We Will Chicago, and additional surveys conducted throughout 2020 through 2022. And then Meeting in a Box, TOOLKIT. So this is something that we want to ensure that every Chicagoan has access to We Will Chicago and be able to provide input. Next slide, and we'll be able to share a little bit more. So Meeting in a Box, this is an example of the cover of how we are thinking about this. So we have facilitator guides and we have participant guides for what regular everyday citizens can participate in this large plan. So it is what we consider a public engagement tool designed for stakeholders to come together and share their thoughts. It encourages group conversations, discussion, and a deeper level of self-directed engagement. So some of the goals that Meeting in a Box aims to do is to increase the overall number of people participating in We Will. We recognize that this plan cannot be possible without people who are not at the table. Provide additional opportunities for engagement. So we are continuing to iterate as we recognize that not all events can be virtual or in person or even hybrid. And so how are we adapting to these times to ensure that people have access? Incorporating input into planning activities and discussions as part of the process, and then people feel more invested in planning efforts, not just We Will, but other ones in the future. Great. I'm going to pass it back to Sasha to do the next presentation.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for that really great presentation. I now want to draw our attention to another key area of MPC's work. As you can imagine, working in advocacy in a city nicknamed the Windy City is not easy. But with MPC, we have recognized our work in water is crucial and recognized that water is a human right. For that reason, for the last decade, MPC has engaged and completed numerous reports on clean water, technical assistance in water management, and recognizing the environmental injustice that lead service lines have brought to our communities. It was this year when we had a pivotal moment in our work when in Illinois, it was enacted that all lead service lines will be replaced. Now, this doesn't just come from the work that MPC does, but the next person I will be introducing is a key member in that progress. So our policy manager, Justin Williams, along with numerous legislators and other change makers in our region have come together for this legacy driving inaction of the replacement of lead service lines. So Justin, I will pass it over to you to learn a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Sasha. So hi, everyone. As Sasha noted, I'm Justin Williams, and I'm policy manager at MPC. And I want to talk to you about some legacy infrastructure that MPC has been working on for the last few years. And since this is an event about legacy, I want to start with just a quick bit of history about how we got here. Next slide, please. Let's start in 1986. That year, Congress passed amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act. One of the things that those amendments did is they banned the installation of lead-based plumbing to convey drinking water. You can see some of the relevant legislative language here. Up until that point, lead had been a popular material for plumbing. Lead has been used in plumbing, some of you may know, since actually ancient Rome. One reason for that is because lead has some physical properties that lend itself well to plumbing. Lead's malleable, so it's good at making turns and dealing with expansion and contraction from freeze and thaw cycles. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, not only is it a material that lends itself well to plumbing, it also has some pretty intense health consequences. We know now, and Congress knew then, that lead is awful from a health perspective. We've known that actually for a long time. There's actually some indication that ancient Romans too knew about lead poisoning, which may come as no surprise given the prevalence of lead plumbing. The health effects are especially pronounced in young children. This slide lists just some of those health effects associated with lead consumption. Among infants and children, it decreases IQ and increases learning and behavioral problems. But also in adults, it can cause organ failure. So acknowledging these and other health effects, Congress banned the installation of lead-based plumbing in drinking water in 1986. Next slide, please. Let's fast forward to 2015. Flint, Michigan starts to pop up in national headlines, having just astronomical levels of lead in drinking water, well in exceedance of health guidelines set by the US Environmental Protection Agency. Many of you know this well-documented and really heartbreaking story. It really shone a spotlight on the racially uneven access to clean drinking water, especially as it relates to lead in drinking water. And while Flint really became a national flashpoint for this issue, Flint itself is part of its own legacy of lead in drinking water crises in the United States. Just a few examples for you. DC in 2004, Galesburg, Illinois, also in 2015, same year as Flint, Newark in 2016, and even today, Benton Harbor, Michigan in 2021 has an ongoing lead in drinking water crisis. And what all these stories share is elevated levels of lead in drinking water owing to a particular piece of infrastructure, lead service lines. Next slide, please. Just to level set for a second, the service line is a pipe that delivers water to your home from the water main under the street. You can see that illustrated here in the diagram as the horizontal line running across the lower left-hand quadrant of the slide there. These lines may be made of lead if the home or building was constructed before 1986, the year that Congress banned their installation. But while Congress banned installation of lead service lines with Safe Drinking Water Act amendments, they never required nor funded the replacement of these lead service lines with lead-free materials. So communities like Flint, Newark, and Chicago left these pipes in the ground for their residents to basically drink out of lead straws. So what we've got then with lead service lines is some legacy infrastructure that is outdated and in this case dangerous, but is still in operation. Today's generation is living with bad infrastructure decisions made decades ago, decisions to install these lines long after the dangers of lead were well known to the health community, and decisions to never require their replacement. Next slide, please. And as it turns out, Illinois has inherited a particularly large portion of that legacy. Illinois has a lot of lead service lines, by some estimates, an eighth of the country's lead service lines, and more than any other state in the nation. There's some variation in reporting, but we believe there's somewhere between 675,000 and 1.7 million lead service lines statewide. Real numbers probably somewhere in the middle. Even though we don't know exactly where those lead service lines are, we have some sense that they are a statewide problem. The map at the right shows you one version of that point. The darker blue the county in that map, the higher the percentage of potential lead service lines in that county. And you'll notice that there are dark blue counties throughout the state. Next slide, please. And while that problem does appear to exist statewide, Illinois' Black, Indigenous, and people of color appear to bear the brunt of that problem. When you compare where lead service lines are with demographic data, you find that Black and Latinx Illinoisans are more than twice as likely as white Illinoisans to live in the communities where almost all of the lead service lines in Illinois exist. Let me put that another way. When you look at the 50 communities with the most lead service lines in Illinois, you see that 2/3 of the state's Black and Latinx populations live there. Meanwhile, less than 1/3 of Illinois' white population lives in those same communities. Communities like Cicero, Peoria, and East St. Louis, which contain higher percentages of Black and Latinx residents relative to the state population, are overrepresented in that list of top 50 communities. A similar trend is reproduced also for Asian American, Illinoisans, and Indigenous people in Illinois. And so what this chart here is showing you is an all too frequent trend. The legacies of our society's bad infrastructure decisions are too often left quite literally at the feet of people of color. Next slide, please. Thankfully, after years of work, the Illinois General Assembly, led by Senator Melinda Bush and Representative Lamont Robinson, have committed to changing this legacy and forging a new one. Senator Bush and Representative Robinson successfully sponsored the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act, which requires the replacement of every lead service line in Illinois. The bill passed the legislature on May 31st of this year and was signed into law on August 27th by the governor. And crucially, the bill built in some provisions to ensure equity and feasibility so that Illinois' communities are set up for success in addressing this legacy infrastructure. You can see on the screen there some of the provisions of the bill that work towards those goals. This is a really big moment because Illinois is now a leader on this issue, becoming one of only 3 states in the country to commit to replacing all of its lead service lines in the coming decades. Alongside partners like the Illinois Environmental Council, Natural Resources Defense Council, Elevate, and other advocates from the civic and environmental communities, MPC was really proud to play a role in supporting passage of this truly landmark legislation. And MPC and our partners drew from pretty deep in our toolboxes to support this effort. We produced research, some of which you've already seen today, policy best practices, media outreach. We talked to a bunch of legislators and whatever else we could do to help our legislature set a new course for Illinois. Next slide, please. The passage of this bill was years in the making, and meeting its requirements is going to take decades. This is truly a legacy building policy to address a legacy infrastructure problem. MPC and our partners have been working hard throughout 2021 and are going to continue to work into 2022 to make sure the implementation of this bill is as equitable as possible. A big part of that is going to be funding, making sure that there's support for low-income communities to do this work without burdening their residents. Picture on the left is President Biden signing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which dedicated $15 billion nationally to lead service line replacement, and which Illinois will receive some portion of. Part of the work ahead is going to be to make sure that that funding makes its way to the communities that most badly need the support. Another aspect of our work ahead is technical assistance, providing assistance to water utilities so they know the scope of the problem in their community and have a plan to address it. The picture on the right is a report of that my colleague Justin Keller was instrumental in, which helped the village of Hazelcrest to develop a lead service line replacement plan. Both sides of this slide are about connecting communities and their residents with the resources they need to really address this legacy infrastructure. I think that's a big opportunity presented by lead service line replacement. It gives us a model for how to address other drinking water challenges that lie ahead and connect communities and residents to resources to really address those legacy infrastructure issues. Thank you for offering me some time to talk about the legacy of this particular work and how it changes what's ahead. And I will turn it back over to Sasha.
Thank you so much, Justin, for walking us through this really pivotal time that we're in right now. As you have learned from our past presentation, sometimes it takes a village or an entire region to really drive the impact that is needed to make long-lasting change. So I would like to point us into our next presentation. As you have learned so far this hour, MPC has always been a connector of public, business, and civic leaders in our region. Some of you may or may not know that in 1974, MPC was crucial in the formation of the Regional Transportation Authority, also known as the RTA, and later on reshaping it in 1983. Since then, MPC has been at the table and been an influence on modernizing our transit systems and has been part of every transportation conversation in our region. But we recognize that, as you've heard, all of these issues are intersecting. Sometimes it's not just about transportation, it's about sustainability, climate change, equity-driven planning. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Audrey Wennick, who has played a pivotal role in this year's policy accomplishments that have really tackled transportation equity, transparency, and climate action through different parts of MPC's muscles that Justin explained, but also through really strong relationship building and municipal collaboration. So I will turn it over to Audrey now to talk about performance-based planning.
Thanks, Sasha. So I am really happy to be here. I'm the Director of Transportation for the Metropolitan Planning Council. And as has been noted, most of our work is done in coalition with a lot of partners, and 2 projects demonstrate this. Passage of a bill to institutionalize performance-based planning and partnership on the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Regional Climate Action Plan. First, I'll talk about performance-based planning. It's about achieving the goals we want for our transportation system. This process involves use of criteria to assess the outcomes that a proposed project will achieve, looking at elements like those listed on the left side of the slide. This evaluation process estimates whether an investment will deliver the results a broad range of stakeholders want. The idea is that these criteria can be used to determine the investment that will deliver the best on the desired outcomes. It's not just about the projects engineers want to build or know how to build. It's not just about the projects politicians want to build in their districts. It's about prioritizing projects based on the ability to deliver the results that residents need. If we look at the benefits of performance-based planning, these methods have been encouraged by the federal government and have been implemented in a number of states. Earlier this year, the Illinois Economic Policy Institute developed a study documenting the benefits that other states have seen as they undertook this process. I think we all want to see the things that are listed on the left side of this slide. We want to see transparency to build public trust in our investments. We want confidence that what we're funding is performing and giving us the desired results. We want to feel confident that the way we spend our precious tax dollars will give us the biggest return on investment. This is the promise of performance-based planning. So why is this so important for Illinois? Our state is already required to be reporting on progress towards national transportation goals. So if you look down the left side of this slide, these are federal goals, and there are also quantitative performance measures that are developed for each of these federal goals. Illinois has to report on our progress to the federal government. Also, every 5 years, Illinois develops a long-range transportation plan identifying how we want our transportation to serve its users. Those are the goals in colors across the top. We need to make sure that the way we're spending our transportation dollars is moving us towards achieving these goals. Performance-based planning operationalizes that. Here I show you how the Federal Highway Administration has a dashboard for each state tracking performance against targets. So Illinois reports the FHWA at set intervals. And it's critical that we're making sure the projects we fund move us in the right direction toward our goals. Although sadly, I must report and highlight that we're not doing so great on some of these measures, in particular, safety. You'll see the number 1,024. That's the number of people who have died on our roadways in a given year, over 1,000 people, and the numbers are not going down. These are the reasons that we need to institutionalize a new process. We need to carefully screen our investments so they deliver on our promises. That's why it was so important when HB 253 passed the Illinois General Assembly this past spring, with the help of many partners like the Civic Committee, the Transportation for Illinois Coalition, and the Transportation Equity Network. This bill requires performance-based planning methods to be developed for Illinois DOT-led capacity projects starting this spring. For every project, the score must be shared publicly so we can see why projects are being funded and what benefits they expect to deliver. Illinois DOT is working on implementation now. They put out a draft this fall. You can see the screenshot here of their website. And while there's still work to be done to ensure that methods are directing us to the outcomes we want, it is a step in the right direction, providing transparency about what is the basis for how we're choosing projects, what are the benefits we expect to get. Performance-based planning and programming is by its nature an iterative process. So we need to be executing the process, seeing the results we get, and going back to refine the criteria to inform the next cycle and get even better results the next time. So please stay engaged, watching how IDOT's process evolves. Everyone must care that their tax dollars are spent wisely to invest in the transportation projects that will improve sustainability, safety, equity, and quality of life. And now I want to transition to the Climate Action Plan. Our excellent partner, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, led development of one of the first regional climate action plans in the country over the past couple of years. And MPC was really happy to be one of the many contributors to development of that plan. We were so pleased to support the launch event in July. It rightly got a lot of attention. It's a great plan, and we want to give all the credit for that to the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. MPC is excited to partner with MMC to promote strategies in the plan that communities can start doing right now. One of the main areas in the plan is transportation. In fact, MPC just participated in the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Environment Committee just Tuesday of this week with a session focusing on how to implement strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, specifically talking about investments to transit. This graphic shows what we need to do in terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled at a regional level, reducing driving. Electrification of cars is not enough. As you see here, vehicle miles traveled has been going up in the dotted line, and if we continue with business as usual, it will continue to go up. The target reduction in driving is the dark, solid black line. We need to be making changes now to get that dotted line to go down, and the plan tells us how to do that. The strategies involve improving conditions so that transit, biking, and walking are safe, appealing, and connect to the places people want to go. This also includes improving land uses so they are denser, multi-use, and supportive of walkable neighborhoods and transit-oriented development. So to help communities implement these transportation strategies, next year, MPC will be partnering with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and the Active Transportation Alliance on research about policies in these communities, and we'll be conducting a series of events focusing on helping communities advance these climate-friendly transportation strategies. The legacy here will be lasting changes to our regional infrastructure so that more people can bike, walk, and use transit for all types of transportation needs. This will make our transportation system more climate resilient and also better at serving people of all ages and abilities. So keep an eye out for these events to be advertised in the new year, and we look forward to seeing you there. Now I will hand the mic back to Sasha.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And actually, thank you to everyone, Justin and Debbie, for your really great presentations. I want to pivot now to really deep dive and get your perspectives on where we go next from this year that we just had. So I will be turning it over to our discussion portion of today's event. Now, we know, as we've lived through, that Chicago's landscape is constantly changing, and these last 2 years are really no different. We have undergone a global pandemic that has impacted health and economic disproportions in our communities. We have recognized the racial and historical reckoning in the events of 2020 and onward. So my question to you, being change makers, is what does Chicago need to do in order to drive a lasting legacy that is centered in equity, prosperity, and sustainability?
I can jump in on that one. From a transportation perspective, I think we really need to acknowledge the inequities of the system that we have built over the past 50 to 70 years, the highway-oriented, auto-oriented system, which means that many people feel they must own a car to function in society. And that's a huge cost burden. And there are a lot of negative impacts from all this driving. And for those who cannot drive or cannot afford to drive, the transit, bike, and walking options have been very underinvested. So we need to continue to make sustainable modes attractive, given that our communities are highly impacted by transportation infrastructure in terms of public health, traffic safety, community cohesion, environmental impacts, and affordability, household affordability. Walking and biking are not alternatives. This is a foundation of our transportation system, and it's zero emissions to boot. So I think we need to continue to work to change the mindset and our investment priorities so that we are building a transportation system that works for all ages and abilities and improves the quality of life in our communities.
Thank you for that.
I feel like this is the first time the city everyday residents get a chance to really be driving some of the things that the city wants to drive. And We Will Chicago is an example of how engagement has really taken the form of going into communities, doing the hard work, talking to everyday residents, asking about their needs. And then the other component is you're not just doing this and then writing a report and then shelving it. I think what's unique about We Will Chicago is the opportunity to really do the cross collaboration and cross agency collaboration and have like a sustainable funding stream that really thinks about what is the future and how to really be equitable and resilient. And we're learning from other cities about how that is done. So that's just an example of the city really trying to, with our support, with some of the things that really need to be at the forefront. Then there's other things such as the Climate Action Plan and other large initiatives that the city and other municipalities are undertaking. So I hope that everyday residents really get a chance to learn more about these initiatives and really participate, because the city and people who traditionally have power want to listen. So that's what I would say.
Hi, and I apologize. I'm having an internet unstable message popping up on Zoom, so I'm going to shut off video in the hopes that that will help me remain clear. So I think in the case of lead service line replacement, the city has some pretty big challenges to face in speeding up replacement. I think that's going to be one of the big things the city needs to figure out how to do in the years ahead. The city has got a lot of really public heat recently about the slow pace of lead service line replacement in the city so far. And while it's undoubtedly true that the city does need to speed things up, I think they're facing some very real challenges in doing that. Some of those are technical in nature about the density of infrastructure in the cities. But maybe more importantly, and I think to Debbie's point, I think the city is facing some challenges in reaching people where they're at on this issue, making sure people feel comfortable with the project underway, making sure that they know why lead service line replacement is important, and making sure that people feel comfortable allowing water utility professionals in their home. Part of the challenge, I think, is that the city is grappling with its own complicated legacy around its water utility. It's no secret that past leadership in the Department of Water and Management created some tension with some Chicagoans, and I think that legacy lingers. And I believe Commissioner Chang wants to and can turn that legacy around. It's a really big effort to get people to trust a large city agency to come into your home and work on your plumbing. But it's also maybe one of the most crucial things that the city can do in the years ahead. We've seen other cities do it, and I really do believe that Chicago can get there too.
Thank you so much for that, Justin. And from what I'm hearing from all of you, we recognize that it takes coalition building, it takes advocacy, it takes research to really move and drive the changes that we want to see in our region. But let's bring it down to a more micro level. For those that are, hearing us today and are in the audience and recognize that a lot of what it takes to drive impact really does take multiple players and action. But are there certain things people could do on an individual level that can really drive systemic change in our region?
I can jump in again. I think it's really, obviously really important to stay engaged, to be paying attention, attending community meetings and aldermanic meetings to know what's going on in your community. I would say, I say this all the time, support your news sources. Pay to subscribe to a newspaper and magazines and public medium so that we have journalism that can provide accurate information about what's going on in government. I would say individuals need to ask questions. I mean, we've had a trajectory of doing things the same way for a while, and not all those things have been, on the right track. And so we need to continually question, why are we doing things? What is the reason we're making a certain public investment? What is the goal we're trying to achieve? Who's benefiting? Who could it harm? And how do we know we're going to get the results we want? And what are we measuring? And then thirdly, I'd say, in terms of our leaders, we know that the easiest thing for any leader is to just stay the course. Inertia is a very strong force, whether that's elected leaders or people in our government agencies. And I think we know that we need to make some bold changes in our society. And individuals can help by showing our elected officials that there is political will to make bold decisions and that's what constituents want. So communicating that, I think, is important.
Just to piggyback off of that, the 2022 is a huge year. Redistricting is happening at the city level and state, and many different municipalities. And the way lines get drawn, they get drawn every 10 years. So making sure that we're understanding politics and the way things are done may not necessarily be the way that it should be done, and offering potential solutions or ways of challenging the status quo could be an avenue where everyday residents start thinking about like real long-term solution that isn't necessarily always going to come from government.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in collective action, and I think that social change happens with the power of people organized together toward a common goal. So I think the first step in sort of exerting an individual power is finding a community that's dedicated to the same issues and goals as you are, and learning how you can support that work. Could be statewide volunteer network. It could be a neighborhood group, a sports club, a nonprofit devoted to infrastructure policy change, for instance. For lead service lines, it might be something like a community organization that helps people understand why lead service line replacement is important and connects neighbors with resources to do the work. I think there are a lot of ways people can be involved in collective action efforts to really meet the goals that they'd like to see.
Thank you for all of those suggestions. And I think it really is important to make sure that we are sort of demystifying what it takes to become a part of this process. So I really thank you for that. And I think thank you for being part of MPC's network and being a source, a resource to everyone. So I want to, final question. We are 2 weeks out before the new year. It has been a really changing and really gratifying 2021. My question to you is, what's next and what are you hopeful for the future?
I would say that we need to be thinking of everything through a lens of climate change and equity. Transportation is the #1 contributor to climate change, and those impacts are being felt most in our low-income communities. And then as we build infrastructure, we're making investments that are going to last a really long time. So I think we need to be really creative in thinking about how we define our problems moving forward and how we solve our problems. We need to be doing more value planning to develop more durable, affordable, and community-oriented solutions. We must be asking how we can get the most value out of every dollar and solve multiple problems at once. So I look forward to more creative solutions that provide environmental equity and social benefits that we need.
I think COVID is going to stick around for a while. And as we are thinking about just not just recovery in these communities that have been hardest impact, what infrastructure are we building to ensure that the next pandemic, the next social issue isn't going to wreak havoc again and change the course of everything we ever known? So I hope that we are thinking a lot more about kind of the future and what kind of sustainable work that we can leave for the next generation. So I am hopeful that, I'd like to meet a lot of people in person, but we'll keep trudging on.
My biggest hope for 2022 is that this really landmark piece of lead service line replacement legislation lives up to its potential. Every resident of Illinois deserves to be drinking lead-free water, and the first step is to make sure there are no more active lead service lines. Getting there is going to require dedicating a lot of resources to the problem, doing a lot of outreach, making sure communities have the resources they need to work in communities. But that's my biggest hope for 2022.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for your really thoughtful responses. I'll now take a few minutes and check to see if there are any live questions in the chat. So if you have any lingering questions for our panelists, please go ahead and write them in the chat now. Come on, I know you want to. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank all of you for, you know what? I did see there is a question about the role of social media, if somebody wants to tackle that.
Sure. Social media has a way of disseminating news and information, but also disinformation and false information. So combating some of that will be something that, as we look into cybersecurity and looking into the future of news and media and how we consume them, will be a big challenge. But I also see a way that social media can push public campaigns. There could be large efforts that use social media, which isn't just like voting in elections, but also things that the city might want to do or try, such as We Will. There could be the utilization of social media and reaching audiences that may not typically be reached. But then we also need to continue doing our traditional media and other tactics, maybe guerrilla marketing, to ensure that people are aware of the different things that are happening in the city.
Thanks for that, Debbie. I also want to draw attention to one more question coming in, and that is, how can MPC and other similar groups assure that public infrastructure dollars are spent wisely to assure the greatest impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the performance-based planning bill that passed is one piece of the puzzle, and creating systems by which there's transparency on why we're investing in certain things. I think I have seen a lot of coalition activity between MPC and a number of other organizations that are involved in sustainability and the environment. So we're part of a number of coalitions where we have been meeting with elected officials, meeting with different government agencies, and already engaging in those conversations about how those agencies are interested in planning that, spending that money, and getting ahead of the opportunities also to apply for discretionary funds. A lot of the transportation money is discretionary grants, so you have to do applications. So the advocates in coalition need to be asking questions, engaging with elected officials, folks that are decision-making roles, to get consensus on the types of projects that we will apply for, so that we'll be more successful in getting those funds. The federal government always likes to see when everyone agrees on a certain project. So those are some of the things we can do and that we are already starting to do.
I'll just second what Audrey said. I mean, I think transparent, data-informed criteria for decision-making and allocation of infrastructure investment dollars is going to be absolutely critical, as much in water infrastructure as it is in transportation or any other kind of infrastructure. You know, I think I mentioned that Illinois is going to receive some portion of lead service line replacement dollars from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and it's going to be really, really critical that those dollars are targeted to communities who wouldn't have the resources to do that on their own. And transparent and data informed criteria can really help with that.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your time today. I know that it never ceases to amaze me, all of the work that has, you know, goes into the achievements and challenges that we have in an entire year. So I want to close our event today with a few remarks. First off, thank you for joining us. We are always very appreciative of your support at the Metropolitan Planning Council, and we're constantly striving for a better, bolder, more equitable region. And I just want to, you know, point your attention to, as I'd mentioned in the beginning, this event was recorded and will be sent out in addition to a few resources leading off this event. So in the meantime, as we step into a new year, I want to remind everyone you could always access MPC resources at our website. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletters. We will be sure to post any upcoming virtual and hopeful in-person events leading in 2022. But until then, thank you for tuning in, and wishing everyone a happy and safe holidays this year.